What's up traders, Tom here with another video. Today we are covering big news. Hertz, the car company, could be looking at bankruptcy. And with Carl Icahn owning almost 40% of the company, let's take a look at Hertz and indeed Icahn's entire portfolio performance this year. Stay tuned. So while I was filming this video, Hertz have actually announced that they are filing for US bankruptcy. We are going to cover that in the video. And also, I'd like to remind everybody that if you're enjoying our content, remember to subscribe and hit that bell to receive more financial news on the markets. So we'll begin today by talking about Kyle Icahn in terms of his stake in Hertz and how big it has ballooned to over the last couple of months and in fact last years. So he's been very outspoken about his ownership in Hertz, and he was actually boasting about his ownership in Hertz as of September 12th, 2019, saying that he owned around 30.1% of the company. Now, this is not unusual for big investors to do. They do it for a few reasons, and I think Icahn does it mostly to drum up business. If you ever look at his outspoken words about Apple dividends a few years ago and Apple being undervalued, whenever he enters a stock, especially in a big position, he tries to convince everybody else that it's a great buy and you should get into it. And that kind of annoys me, to be honest, but it is something that he does. So you need to be very wary, and I think his current portfolio, when we take a look at it, will show you why just because he says something is good may not be anymore. And just because he's had a lot of success, it looks like a lot of well-known investors are not finding success like they used to be in the current market conditions. So Icahn has been pretty much drumming up business for two of the companies, or three of the companies his ownership is quite high in. One of them is Occidental Petroleum Corporation. He pretty much was talking about this during the March period of crash, and he was saying, buy more, it's basically being given away. In fact, his statement was, Icahn says some stocks are being given away. So he literally did say that. Hertz Global Holdings, another one that he was adding to, and we'll find out how much he owns in just a minute. And of course, HP. So he's added extra HP as well, and he believed that to be pretty decent value. Now, as we mentioned, during the shooting of this video, Hertz has actually now filed for bankruptcy protection as car rentals completely evaporate during the crisis. And it looks like now we're sitting in a case where will Carl come in and save the share? He owns a huge amount of it. In fact, as disclosed, he owns just under 40% of the entire company. And it looks like they will require something from him, or they are going to go potentially down, or they'll need creditors to do something. And I'm sure he has a plan, like most of these rich people do. They sometimes profit actually off this concept of taking it off market. But unfortunately, if you're a shareholder, it is a tough weekend to wait for, and we'll have to find out more news next week once we find out what exactly is happening. It does look like this particular bankruptcy casing isn't in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and some franchisees. It seems to be focused more on the American market. And it does also look like they went to Congress to try to get some form of relief package, and they have been refused that relief package. So it's interesting to see that we are starting to see companies go to Congress, ask for relief, and are getting refused. And that just shows you that the government can't save everybody during this crisis. And we are seeing a turning of the tides potentially in companies now going bankrupt and not being saved by the government. And that can cause a lot of financial pain, because Hertz is basically employing around 38,000 employees worldwide and had around $19 billion of debt. So let's take a look now at Icahn's actual portfolio, and things are not looking good. Now, this was of the 31st of the 3rd, but still, if you looked at any of these companies as of today's value, some are worse, in fact, than what is actually said here. So firstly, let's talk about his main ownership in Hertz. So Hertz Global Holdings, 39% basically of holdings, and he's actually upped this stake since then. So he'd be holding probably well over 40% of Hertz. At this point, he was down 81%. Effectively now, that could be 100% loss, but I'm sure he will get some perks out of this due to his ownership. So Hertz massive stake ownership from Icahn. The other thing, Occidental, as we said, he's been adding to that and he's been telling everybody how great that is. Again, a very poor investment, still has not done well, and he owns around 9.67% of shares outstanding and around 5.7% of his portfolio. Now, his biggest holding is in his own conglomerate, which is Icahn Enterprises, and that's no surprise that he owns 53% in that. And in a later video, we'll go through a full coverage of what is in that one. HP, another company that's well known that he's been adding to and pretty big proponent of. He owns around 6% of that and around 4.4% of shares outstanding. And then, of course, Xerox, he owns around 2.47% weighting in that one. So quite a few software and hardware companies. He's very heavily into gas companies, which has been incredibly poor for him. And the choices that he's made in travel and leisure have really been painful to him as well, especially his Hertz holding. So overall, his positions are very, very nasty. And even if you looked at them into actually today's value, you'll notice he is still down a lot of money. And I would say that possibly his portfolio is one of the worst performers of all of the big kind of well-known investors out there. And it does seem like the tides are turning in terms of many of these older, well-known, multi-billionaire investors are starting to get hurt more than usual during this crisis. So they haven't seen it coming, and they've also invested in, I would say, more value type investing, and potentially value investing has not done well over the last couple of decades. Many people point out Warren Buffett hasn't beaten the indices in terms of the S&P 500 for almost 2 decades now. And while he's been sitting in cash and doing fine, he still hasn't been outperforming like he did during the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So that is interesting to look at. So who is being hurt by this Hertz the most? And unfortunately, it looks like the retail investors. So we have here the Robinhood app in terms of daily kind of purchases. Huge amounts of users, up to 45,000 here, starting to buy what they considered the dip in Hertz. And it just shows that you really need to think about things slightly logically when it comes to purchasing stuff. And if you do take risks like this, don't put all of your money in one basket. Bankruptcies unfortunately happen all the time. You just never hear about them because no one talks about them, especially in penny stocks. Now, Hertz is no penny stock, but even the big ones can fail. And unfortunately, it looks like Robinhood users have been jumping into this share as an opportunity arises, and it has not worked out for them. So diversification is key whenever you're looking at investments. The other thing I want to kind of point out, and I think it's something that when you're looking at investments in the future, you should probably always pay attention to, and that is bond prices. So bond prices pretty much will be reflected, of course, in stock. But if you see a coupon miss, which is what happened effectively here, that is not a good sign for the company. If the company is not paying out its coupon, that's really bad for credit. And effectively, that means so many different things. It means they have to pay way more money for the credit, which is what we've seen with several liners and several other leisure kind of companies recently. And on top of that, they are looking incredibly shaky. It means their cash flow is poor. And the number one killer of businesses is cash flow. Anyone out there that has a small business like us or anybody else, if you do not have cash flow, you will go out of business. And that is partly why all the governments around the world are creating stimulus checks for everybody. They're creating some kind of cash flow or some kind of loan so that companies can survive this current crisis and come out the other end. If there is no cash flow coming in, they will go bankrupt. So here is possibly one of the bigger cases so far that we've seen being crushed by the current crisis. And it looks like Hertz will probably not recover in the way that we'll see it. Unfortunately for most investors, what it will do is it'll probably come back. It'll probably still be a company and it'll still be doing relatively well. But what it won't be doing is paying back the shareholders. So I do feel bad for everybody there. So if we take a look at what happened after market, obviously anybody that was there for the news instantly dumped it. Wall Street Journal came out, said they could be filing for bankruptcy, and the share price went from a $2.84 close to $1.82 and initially bounced off $1.50 with some buying support. I'd be pretty worried if I was holding this with any great quantity over the weekend now that we've found out the news, but I wish everybody the best, and obviously we'll be covering a lot more content on this channel in the future. So remember to subscribe, hit that bell, comment down below on whether you think Hertz is going to survive this crisis, and like the video, and we'll see you in another video coming Monday. Happy trading, everybody.